Welcome back, everybody. This is Chad and Eric here with Guitarsenal, and today we've got another Tone Talk episode for you. Today we're going to be posing the question, is vintage better than modern? And have some of these new companies crap the bed in terms of quality? Like, everybody knows about some of the recent growing pains that Gibson's been under in terms of, new Gibson guitars versus old Gibson guitars. We're going to talk about that a bit. And just in general, like, we're going to talk a little bit about amps, guitars, effects, everything. Is the new stuff better than the old stuff? Or is the vintage article the only way to go? And is all the new stuff garbage? So how should we expand on that?
Well, I think all you have to do is look around this room and see how many vintage articles are here to answer that question. We'll be seeing you.
Well, I mean, look, the thing is, there is a lot of misconception, I believe, amongst people who think, oh, well, only a vintage 1963 Fender can be, the best sound, and all the newer stuff isn't quite as good. I think there's a misconception there. I mean,
there is. I mean, the big thing is with just amplifiers. Let's just start off talking about amps.
Sure.
All right, so vintage amps, all right, point-to-point wired, hand-wired, everything was just put together with love and care. Everything was tested real well. Quality control was stellar, okay? Well, until like CBS came along, and then it kind of went downhill after that, right? But the thing is, though, the reason people gravitate toward those amps is because there's this belief, and I mean, I think it's a factual
merited
thing. I think it's merited.
Yeah.
But that the simpler the circuit is, as far as the wiring and everything goes, and the point-to-point construction, it sounds better. Your signal goes through the amp, and it's more of a clean path, and everything just works better. The old tubes sound better, and I mean, all you have to do is look at the market and see what kind of prices like vintage tubes, like old RCAs and stuff, are fetching. I mean, people want it because they want that sound. There has got to be some merit in it for people to keep paying that money. If the old tubes didn't sound better than a new like Softac or whatever, then why would they be $200 for a set of like 6L6s or whatever the case is, or $200 a piece?
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment. Okay.
Always with the devil's
I want you to picture that it's 1964, and you've just kissed your wife bye for the morning. You're going to work, and your wife is going to work at Fender, and she's getting in her whale fin looking car with the big old fins on the back. She's got her blue hair up in a big old bun, and she's smoking a big old Marlboro, and she's going to work. And she sits down at the amp bench, and she's soldering amps with lead solder, and she's blowing cigarette smoke, and there's none of this OSHA crap. You have to think, Fender got it right. That's the weird thing about it. When you look at these vintage Fender amps, and you think, man, the sound is so great. It's so weird to think that they got it right. And that these old Fenders and Marshalls and stuff are what all these other amp companies tend to want to copy. Now,
and they did.
And they did.
I mean,
they did.
For the most part.
They did. They are very copied circuits, but because they work. And, there are a lot of cost-cutting measures that got put into vintage amps as well. I mean, like when you started getting into some of the, late 60s Fenders after the CBS buyout in 65, I think it was, when they bought Fender out, the amps kind of started to take on some various changes in terms of the cosmetic features, but also circuit changes. And some of the circuit changes made on Fender amps were to improve the safety of the amplifiers, but to cut cost as well.
Absolutely.
So cost-cutting measures have always been a part of a company and making something. A lot of the older cabinets on the Fenders might use MDF instead of real plywood, whereby you look at that old 62 Concert over there, it's got a real deal plywood cabinet, and that's obviously a more expensive option to have a real cabinet.
The big thing is just to look at economics as a whole. I mean, you're a company, you're making amplifiers, okay? Well, the cost of materials go up, okay? So you increase the cost of the amps, your sales go down. It's like, what's going on? Well, nobody wants to pay the higher prices. So you cut costs in whatever ways you can. And, their engineers would revamp the circuits a little bit, or change something, or maybe pull some components out, or replace the components with maybe a cheaper version, or whatever the case is, something with more tolerance, than a finer tolerance item, whatever the case might be, to save that money, and then get the price point back down to where it should be. But the consumer is kind of getting shorted in the stick for the most part. But the thing is, people are fickle. They don't want to pay that higher price for the same quality at a future day. They expect to pay the same that they paid 10 years ago, whatever the case is. So there's a lot of people that don't really understand how that works. I mean, the cost of an amplifier to be produced back in the day, if you look at like inflation and everything, it's very similar to what it is today as far as the big name manufacturers.
When you call up Milkman Amps,
now boutique
and you have a handmade point-to-point wired blackface amp made by Milkman, it's going to cost you definitely premium 1960s dollars.
It's going to cost you way more money now to get an amp that's built to that spec.
Right.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, if you look at the construction methods and everything, and just the assembly line method that these amps are produced in, if you look at the way they're produced now, yeah, the cost is with inflation and just comparing the two costs, it's about the same. But like Eric said, the custom amps and stuff, that's where you're getting into paying $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for a custom point-to-point hand-wired amp that probably sounds pretty dang good. I mean, we played through some really crazy amplifiers and some high-end like Sewers and what were some of the other ones that we played in Texas there?
Well,
you've got the Lazy J over
here.
there, but these amps, they do fetch a premium, but they are beautifully made amplifiers.
So see, Jesse Hoff makes these Lazy J's, and it's an angry tweed.
Angry as well,
and they're really well made. And she's a little dusty. I need to get slipcover for this, but
yeah, you do.
Man, what a great amplifier! And yeah, I paid premium money for this amp, but it is a premium amp made by a very well-respected builder. So anyway, just because an amp is old doesn't necessarily mean it's good. Okay, that's what we determine. And just because an amp is expensive and new doesn't mean it's good.
Nope. But a lot of the Fenders that are coming out now, people mod them all the time and stuff. They're not quite the same. Like you look at the Hot Rod DeVilles and such. Those tube amps that came out. Like they're okay, but a lot would say that they're really not up to snuff with the Fender name. They just don't really have that good Fender sound.
I would put the cleans on like a Hot Rod DeVille or a Blues DeVille or something like that, or Blues Deluxe. I would put the cleans on those amps on par with like late 70s Fenders.
Yeah, I would say so.
Silver face Fenders are not bad amps, and a lot of them can be black-faced. I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole because that's kind of a different conversation now. We talked a little bit about vintage amps and then also more modern amps and why some of the boutique makers may be demanding the prices that they demand because of the quality of components and the labor to do a point-to-point wire job. Newer amps, especially when they're mass-produced by someone like Fender, we'll just use them as an example, generally use circuit boards. Which is not a problem. Everybody tends to go, oh, well, point-to-point wired is better than a circuit board. Yeah, it may be for sound or whatever, but remember, for manufacturing, when you're trying to mass produce something, a circuit board is much better. Somebody can be on a line making circuit boards, and then your amp tech, I guess, just puts them together or whatever. And
like on a lot of the modern Fenders, there's literally the PCB, which is the board, has all the components on it, and then they have basically the wire. All the wiring and stuff is in like these strips. So you have multiple wires coming out, and it's just literally an array that you just plug in, and then everything just gets distributed out, like to all the tone controls, volume, vibrato circuits, reverb circuits, all that stuff. It's just all boarded in, and it does make the manufacturing a lot easier and quicker and more efficient for sure, and it keeps the cost down. That's the big thing. Nobody's going to pay.
The amplifiers do sound good. We did a Pro Junior recently where we did some of the Bill M mods and Fromel. I'm sorry, I always get all this mixed up. No. We did the Fromel mods on it, and it did help the overall sound of the amp. You're going to get into a lot less tech-friendly amp when you get into the newer stuff versus the old point-to-point stuff.
Absolutely.
You go to any amp tech and say, hey, can you work on my 65 Blackface Super Reverb? They're going to be like, oh, with pleasure, because they're so easy to work on, and they're so tech-friendly, which is wonderful. So let's get away from amps for a moment. We could discuss this all day. Let's talk a little bit about effects, okay? What about effects? Vintage effects versus new effects. Are the new effects better than the old effects? What about construction, methods? Let's discuss that a little bit. What do you think?
Talk about this tank you got right here without a back on it.
Well, that's perfect for
Vox Tone Bender.
Yeah.
Early 60s?
Mid-60s.
Mid-60s?
Yeah.
Yeah. Built like a tank. Little scratchy pots. We
got some contact cleaner in there and cleaned them up just fine.
It works pretty good. The switch is a little bit weird, okay? But a little bitty PCB with all the old school components in there. And boy, this sucker sounds good. Real germanium transistors.
Yep.
I mean, you can't get that sound too much anymore without going boutique.
Right. So here we've got a Spaceman Nebula. This is definitely one of my favorite fuzz pedals. Now you can quickly see, comparing a vintage fuzz like the Tone Bender to the Nebula, that the Nebula has a lot more bells and whistles and a lot more functionality. You've got a clean to effect blend where you can just blend in a little bit of the effect. You've got an octave up and down switch that can be manipulated. And you got a lot of interesting features. I mean, this particular one has a beautiful aged copper housing, and that's just a level of attention and beauty and just, let's face it, cool cosmetic factor that you just don't see with vintage pedals.
Yeah, people like aesthetics nowadays.
Back then, pedals were made to be kicked around on the stage. I mean, this thing, and to be fair, you know, this pedal is a very valuable pedal now, and a lot of people go, oh, Vox Tone Bender, oh my God. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's great. But back in the day, this was a cheap pedal to make.
I know.
They weren't intended to be, they weren't thinking they'd be around 50 years
Look
from
at
now.
the Dallas Arbiters. Look at the fuzz faces and all. I mean, those things fetch well over $2,000 now.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
This is like a $600 fuzz.
yeah, original Univibes. I mean, those pedals are desirable. They're expensive because people want that sound. Like all the greats, you know, you listen to Hendrix. What do you hear?
Fuzz face.
I mean, and a Univibe, you know, so people want that sound.
There is a beauty and a charm to the older effects pedals, and
Yeah,
there
absolutely.
are, I think that right now, the prices that a lot of the vintage effects command, I would say, are probably more for their intrinsic collective value more than their tone, but I'm going to get berated for that because, believe me, these things are amazing. If you've got a tube amp that's already cooking, and you push this in the front and dial in your selected amount of savagery, this pedal is amazing. It sounds great.
Well,
now, would I go paying $1,000 for one when you can get a Titan 2 for like $300?
Yeah, but there's even modern boutique pedals that fetch that kind of money, like the Analog Man, the Sun Faces. Yeah, it's basically kind of an improved Dallas Arbiter fuzz face.
Well, the Prince
clone.
of Tone, King of Tone.
Well, yeah, but
those things too.
specifically like that particular fuzz is insane because the original like germanium units, the germanium transistors are getting more and more rare all the time, and I don't know if Mike actually even has them available on the website now with those particular transistors, but those things aftermarket, like you'd have a year wait on the pedal, but then the aftermarket price, those pedals would be selling for like $800 or $900. They would be like, you know, sort of vintage money.
People, again,
But they sound just like the vintage unit.
people will attribute a good sound, a good tone, and a good level build to an intrinsic amount of money. It doesn't matter if something's old or not. What matters is if it's good or not. So the thing is, I play vintage guitars that are turds. We'll get on that in a minute. Okay, so let's talk about a delay real quick. All right, so this is a Strymon timeline. We did a video on this particular delay pedal, and I'll be very, very honest with you guys, brutally honest. I'm a complete Neanderthal when it comes to various pedals, and this one's a little bit too complicated for me. It's got too many bells and whistles. Now, okay, but the sounds are on point.
Look,
It is a beautiful sounding delay pedal.
that video was what, like 45 minutes long, and I'm down on the floor, like literally just playing with the knobs because we looked at the manuals like, oh my God, it's like this thick.
Yeah.
You know,
This has maybe a little bit too many bells and whistles. Now, is that to say that, is this pedal as good as this vintage Boss DM2? You better bet your socks it is. This pedal sounds fantastic. It really, really does. And Strymon is doing one heck of a job with their pedals. Strymon is setting the standard, in my opinion, for what effects pedals should deliver for the end musician. If you love to tinker, this is your delay. If you want one delay pedal and you want to really play around with a lot of different sounds, it'll do it.
well, and save your sounds too, presets and all that.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the benefit of some of the modern pedals. They can get those vintage sounds through the digital technology, but you can save all that stuff once you find something cool and just, you know, pull it back up. The more simple pedals, you basically just dial it in as you go. You
And
know?
I prefer that. I like the adventure of tweaking these knobs a little bit and getting some of that oscillation and crazy stuff going on. So now this vintage DM2 is about a $200 pedal. Brand new, the Strymon timelines are pushing $400+.
Yep.
So this is a more expensive option. Now I have seen these on the used market bring as little as like $250. So if you're into that zone where, man, I want a really warm sounding delay pedal and I don't know if I want to go vintage. Now technically this is vintage because this is like, you know, late 70s, I think, maybe early 80s.
Oh, it's pretty bad when 80s is vintage now.
I know.
It
Well,
makes me feel
these
old.
pedals are not without their quirks, but this is probably, in my opinion, one of the best analog delays that you can get. It uses bucket brigade device in it. Really, really nice. And then you get on the boutique world of it. Now you look at the cost of a Strymon Timeline, then you look at the cost of like a vintage DM2, which sometimes can be had for like $150. Then you get somewhere in the middle, and this is where I think is a healthy compromise. Would be something like this Analog Man digital, or this analog delay. Why don't you explain?
This is ARDX20, and basically what Mike did was just use a analog circuit, and just kind of redesign it. But it's basically 2 delay pedals in one. You can't use both units at the same time and overlap the delays, but you can have 2 settings. And these things will self-oscillate. They're crazy, and they're relatively affordably priced for what they are. They are imported units. These are assembled in China, but they're obviously designed by Mike and everything and tuned here in the States, but wonderful sounding pedals. And,
Unplug that cable.
And this thing, they retail for just south of about $300, but you're basically getting 2 delay pedals in one. So when you look at it from that perspective, you're getting a heck of a value. Plus, they are just super warm sounding, and they have a lot of bells and whistles. You can use expression pedals with them. You can A/B them. You can run the dry signal out, or you can have an effects loop running with like a course, so you can have just the delay sound with an effect of your choice. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff you can do with it, and it's all analog.
And we made a pretty funny observation earlier. So I sent one of my vintage Nobles pedals to Analog Man to have it reboxed, and it's the same enclosure.
Close to it.
It is. It's the same enclosure. Actually, it does look like it's maybe a little bit smaller.
A little bit smaller.
But it's a very similar enclosure.
Very similar.
Yeah.
It's like a Hammond style.
Look, the thing is, Analog Man does a great job on his pedals. If you can't tell, we really like his stuff. I've got a separate video on this little jam board if you guys want to check that out. But I just thought I would make that distinction that, I have vintage pedals like my old Nobles, but sometimes the housings on them are not quite as good. The housings aren't a problem, but the layout of the circuit and the way the jacks are mounted can leave a little bit to be desired. So yeah, there's cases where I've sent a vintage pedal to have it reboxed, like I did with the ODRS, just to get a little bit more functionality brought back to life with my vintage unit. I mean, there's people that will rebox this for you.
Yep.
No problem. Now, in case you don't, I wouldn't, but some folks might have one that's really collectible and super clean in the box. You could take the circuit out of this enclosure and put it in a smaller enclosure, absolutely.
You sure could.
So there's so many different things that we could discuss about old versus new pedals. There's a lot of people that go, oh, well, the new construction methods of using like the PCB circuits.
Well, look, a lot of people would say like the new Boss pedals. There's a lot of the new Boss pedals that, are more recent that they sound okay, but some of them just don't sound as good as the original units. You can literally put them side by side, and there's definitely tonal differences. I mean, the components that are used, the chipsets that are used, whatever the case is, but the quality of the like Boss type pedals and the more affordable level pedals has really pretty much stayed the same over the years. They've obviously gone from production in Japan to production in like Taiwan or Korea, other.
I think a lot of the new Bosses are made in Taiwan, which is not a problem. They seem to hold up good.
But cutting costs, keeping costs down.
But still maintaining a high quality. Now, if you guys want to check it out, go over to the JHS blog on YouTube and subscribe to his channel over there. And JHS has a bunch of great videos on this type of subject, and he goes into an entire episode on modern versus vintage pedals in terms of construction and everything. So if you want to learn more, that's probably a video that you need to check out. I'll put a link to that in the description box below in case you want to go watch that video. So let's get down to the beans and bullets. This is really what the video is about. I didn't mean to digress too much when it comes to amps and pedals, but I thought it was important to mention that there's a lot of great functional things that are being done with newer effects. Just because an effect is vintage or amp is vintage doesn't mean it's good. Just because a new piece of equipment is really expensive doesn't mean it's good. Always let your ears be the guide. So let's talk a little bit about guitars. First, we'll start with Fender.
Fender again.
Well, look, I'm a Fender guy. Okay, so this is my first Strat. My mom bought me this Strat when I was 16, turned 16. So this one's pushing a few years. It's been around a minute, and it's obviously had quite a few, you may call it tasteful modifications or not. And it's got a good bit of wear.
A few notes played on it. You know?
It's the neck's got a good bit of wear on it. This is a great Strat.
Just tell them you took some sandpaper today. You didn't really play all that on there.
Oh yeah, I did.
Relic.
So this guitar, $300.
Mm-hmm. Mexi Strat.
Mexi, yeah. So, we put Emerson wiring harness in this guitar. Okay, and it's got a set of Abbey wound, Woodstock 69 custom shop pickups. I've got a Telly top hat, standard 3-ply white pick guard, standard maple neck. And this guitar has had one refret.
Yep, it has been refretted with your jumbo.
It's got big jumbo frets on it. This is a great guitar. $300 guitar, and I would pit this against a lot of American stuff.
It sounds really good. I mean, I've heard American Strats, like when Eric and I are out at Guitar Center or wherever, pick up a brand new American Strat or some kind of higher end deal, and it's like, it just doesn't sound good. Like the woods and everything, it just doesn't really mesh well.
Yeah.
But sometimes, you really do get a good one. But I had a Mexi Strat. It was like a 50s reissue, and it did not sound good. I bought it sight unseen. It did not sound good. It did not play very well. Even after a good setup, it still just didn't play very well at all. So, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't.
This was my first real guitar, and I think it stood the test of time, and it's held up really good.
Before that, you were playing air guitar?
Well, no. I think I was playing on my dad's old Harmony Rocket.
Yeah.
That was the only guitar I had, and then this was my first real guitar, and I would never get rid of this guitar.
Yeah.
It's great. It's a wonderful Strat, and it's light, and it rings when you hit a chord on it. You really feel it, the whole thing vibrate. It's just a great guitar, but not expensive. All right, so fast forward to 3 years ago, and my wife bought me this Strat. Okay, and this is a Fender American Standard that is a Guitar Center special with the factory rosewood neck. So it's just all rosewood. It still has the skunk stripe on the back, same type of truss rod assembly. This has Fender custom shop Fat 50s pickups and their standard wiring harness. And it's a great Strat. It's a modern Strat, but it's great.
It sounded better. That Strat sounded way better than the baby blue one.
Right.
I had two identicals.
I had a baby blue one, and it was the same one with the rosewood neck, and it sounds great. But this red one, this is a legit guitar.
Maybe it's just something with you and red guitars, but like literally the exact same model, the special edition for Guitar Center, two of the identical guitars, different colors, and they sound good, but that one sounded way better.
This is an absolute boss of a guitar, and it's a newer Fender. Now I will say,
now the quality of that guitar is great.
Oh,
it's not like it's put together cheaply and it's just a piece of junk. It's not like you're walking into Walmart and buying like a box guitar set with a tiny little amp in it.
No, great guitar. Let me tell you something. So, and we'll get on to Gibson in a minute. We're going to pick on Gibson. So I was at Guitar Center the other day, and I found an amp in there that I thought was kind of cool. I was like, well, I'm going to try this amp out. I was like, well, I want something comparable to like one of my nice Tellys. So I went and grabbed an American Elite Telecaster off the wall. Okay. I went and plugged it into the amplifier. Looked down at the input jack. It was all wobbling and crackly and like falling out of the guitar and like all loose and stuff. $1,600 guitar with the loose input jack and the little metal piece that goes in there was all loose and wobbling around, and the amp was going and cutting in and out. And it wasn't the amp; it was the guitar. $1,600 guitar with issues right out of the box.
And I don't know. I mean, is that a
quality control issue?
Is it a quality control issue at the factory, or is it was like, the guys at the shop are putting it out and they're just not checking this stuff? They're just hanging it on the wall.
Or maybe somebody dropped it and messed up the input jack, and the sales associate didn't catch it. But the point I'm making is that, there have been quality control issues. And let's talk a little bit about vintage Fenders too. I mean, so, here's a couple of modern-esque Fenders. All right, here's a 76 Telecaster Deluxe. Okay?
A deluxe.
And this has got the Seth Lover wide range humbucking pickups. Heavy piece of ash that this thing's made out of. It's a great guitar, but these guitars suffer from that big sloppy neck joint. And the reason that the neck joints on these guitars are such crap is because they purposely routed them on the big side because they're spraying all this polyurethane on the bodies, and the polyurethane was so thick that they couldn't fit the necks on there. So they had to make the neck joint bigger to be able to get the necks on and off. Is this a really great guitar? Can be. With a good neck reset. It needed the neck shimmed and everything. It needed frets. So this guitar's had a fresh set of frets, a setup, a neck reset.
But boy, does it sound good.
Boy, does it sound good. So, you know, the thing is, there was a lot of cost-cutting measures that were put into this guitar when it was originally made. So to say just because a guitar is vintage is automatically good is not always the case. I play vintage guitars that are pieces of crap that don't sound good. Just because a Strat is from 1962 doesn't mean it's a good guitar. They put out crap guitars back then.
Like I said earlier, you know, two identical guitars, one sounds better. Is that just a modern problem? No. It's a problem throughout all time. I mean, you can have two exact things that are made to the exact same specifications, but they're going to sound different. I mean, you know, case in point, you can talk about Gibson. I've got something, you know, kind of Gibson related to talk about, but it follows that same suit.
Show my telly real quick.
Which one? The 52?
Yeah. So, all right, so now we get into like, all right, so this is a custom shop Fender guitar.
There you go.
So this is a 52 custom shop built by Paul Waller. And I bought this from George up at Atlanta Discount. This is from his personal collection. It's a factory relic that Paul Waller did. And it's got a heavy V-neck that feels great. And it's got some big jumbo frets on it. And this is literally has to be my favorite guitar by far. And it's a custom shop. But when you're paying that kind of money, you come to expect the quality of a custom shop instrument. I've never picked up a Fender custom shop instrument that wasn't fantastic. So that's just to give you a wide range of everything from inexpensive on the Mexi all the way up through vintage, modern, and then obviously custom shop. So let's jump over to Gibson. That's what everybody wants to hear us talk about. Gibson's had some major quality control issues. I mean, you know, that one PR move that they made where they had the picture of the pre-broken headstock. I know you've seen that. That's haunted them. I mean, they've really had issues with quality control in recent years.
I don't know. Gibson's just one of those things where, I don't know, it really is like reaching into a bag and it's just you're pulling out something random. It's like hoping it's going to work.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's no way I would buy a new vintage guitar or a new Gibson guitar unseen without playing it.
What's crazy to me, like we talked about before, is just the prices on new Gibsons. It's just like, why? I don't get it. I don't get the pricing structure. But
grab my deluxe.
Get the deluxe, the deluxe.
But all right, we're gonna have a little bit of. I'm gonna be honest here, guys. Okay. All right. This is a 72 gold top. A lot of people in Gibson collecting circles would say that this is a piece of crap guitar, just because it's a Norland era instrument and it's got the headstock volute. That's one thing that you'll see is this little reinforcement back here. Now, it's because a lot of headstocks were breaking on the vintage unit. So one could argue that the old, 50s and 60s Gibsons, oh, well, that was a weakness in the design, and if you took a hard enough hit, the headstock would break. So was Norland wrong by putting the volute there? Well, if it's a structural improvement and it makes it where the headstock won't break, I say who gives a crap? There's all these people who go, oh, it's got the volute, it's a crummy guitar. Bull crap, this is a boss guitar.
I think it sounds great.
This is a great guitar.
I've seen Gibsons and heard Gibsons that sound like it sounds like you stuck your guitar cable into a mud puddle. I mean, literally. It's just, they have no punch, there's no treble. You can have your amp dimed and everything turned up and the guitar still just sounds like mud. I mean, you hear that mud? Yeah, that's coming from that Les Paul. But this one, that thing is very Strat-like. It's got a ton of punch.
Absolutely the most boss Gibson I own. It's great. All right, so this is a 72. That back up. Traded out for the 67 there. All right, and we're getting somewhere, guys. Just bear with me.
For the what now?
This is 67
SG.
SG.
Yeah, right here.
All right, so this is a 67 SG Melody Maker. Now, this particular guitar has cost savings written all over it.
Yeah, it does.
All right, it's a student guitar. It's got thinner body. All right, so less mahogany. All right, you've got a more simplified pickup arrangement with a pre-wired pick guard that could just drop right in, so it simplified the routing. Okay, You also had, you notice that on this guitar, there's no ears. There's no open book on the ears of on the sides of the headstock. That's to simplify the manufacturing process of this guitar. You can see it uses the cheaper tuners. So to say that
cheaper bridge too,
cheaper bridge, yeah, use a Maestro tremolo, which works.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, this guitar is a cost-cutting measure, and to say that, oh well, only new Gibsons are crappy because, oh well, they cut costs and they did this and did that. Guys, Gibson's been cutting costs for a long time. This guitar literally is a walking cost-cutting measure. Now, is this an inferior instrument? Absolutely not. It's a wonderful instrument and it's very light, but don't think that just because a guitar is vintage that there wasn't some cost-cutting measure somewhere to try to ease the manufacturing process and save them money.
You had all manner of different budgets back then too, just like you have today.
You want your SG?
Sure. Yeah, one of the things with Gibson though, like in recent memory, is just them trying to kind of expand out and cover more grounds in the music world. I mean, they bought electronic music companies and things like that, and
they bought like a DJ company, DJ equipment.
But it's like they were taking their focus off of what their roots were, because maybe sales were down or whatever the case is because of the poor quality, and they're diving into other things that they really, in my opinion, shouldn't be. I mean, Gibson's like Les Pauls, you know. But when you look back on like the 90s era reissues, this is I think like a 92 or 96, I can't recall, but this is
67.
Yeah, it's a 67 reissue, and this is made basically just like a 67 would have been. I mean, it's got the thin body, you've got tune-o-matic bridge. I can't remember what these pickups are in here, but the original owner did have a kind of a boutique wiring harness dropped in this thing. Full body binding, trapezoidal inlays, open book headstock, old school tuners. And this thing sounds great.
That's such a great SG.
Mean, they just have a good punch to them. And I picked this thing up just to kind of piddle around with slide and stuff like that. But I always go back and forth between guitar and bass.
It's such a great guitar, man.
That guitar sounds way better than some that I was playing in some of the guitar centers and stuff around that were, you know, newer models that were reissues too. They can't hold a candle to that guitar. But, you know,
I've played a lot of SGs, man, and this one is killer. Great SG.
Yep. Thing too with Gibson, back in the day, you know, they bought several different other companies. You know, obviously, you know, they bought like Epiphone and things like that. They bought Tobias. Tobias is actually...
They're owned by Gibson, right?
They are owned by Gibson. Mike Tobias produced this bass under the MTD name. This is one of his like kind of full handmade basses, he and his son. But back in the day, Tobias made handmade instruments under his own name ever since like the late 70s. But at one point, Gibson you know, had some interest in it, so they bought the name. And early on, the basses were great, like the old Tobias Growlers and stuff. Oh, God dang, those basses were awesome.
For the money, you can't beat those basses.
But the ones that they're producing now are garbage. They are awful. And MTD has a line that I think they're producing in Korea, but it's the Kingston line. Those basses are stellar. They are really good. I've played several of those Kingstons, but the Tobias basses, and they've got these ones called like the Tobias Tobies. They are very much entry-level basses. They could use a good setup, and they'd probably be okay, but man,
maybe just, an electronics upgrade.
Yeah, just looking at them and just the way they feel, the way they're put together, you know, it's just not good. You know, I mean, but you know, Mike is still doing right by people on the budget line. I mean, some of the Kingston basses can get up into like the $1,000-$1,200 range, kind of like some of the it's kind of sort of like the standard like Fender Jazzes and P bass and stuff. They can be anywhere between about like $600-$700 on up to about 11 or 12 depending on the model. But they're very, very much competitive with the cheaper Fender models. And even the Mexies, you know, are great too. I mean, it's just, I don't know. You see Gibson like take over a brand, and these big companies take over a brand, and they start out good, and then steadily they just kind of go downhill. You know, I don't like seeing that.
Well, I think we'll end on the note of sort of just thinking about it from this perspective. Let a piece of gear talk to you. If you pick up a guitar, it doesn't matter if it was a Gibson made last week. Pick it up and play it. Does it sound good? Do you like it? Does the neck feel good? Does it stay in tune? Is the input jack nice and solid? You know, does it have crappy electronics? Observe what you know, look at what you're buying and scrutinize what you're buying. Is it a great guitar? Do you love it? Buy it. who cares when it's made?
Yep.
Okay? You know, Gibson, for instance, like my Deluxe is from 72. Gibson, I believe just within the last year or two, reissued their Deluxe line with some nice new pretty colors. So they make a mini humbucker Les Paul Deluxe now. That's a brand new made instrument. I haven't had a chance to check one out. I'd like to try one and maybe pit it against my vintage one. You never know. The thing might sound just as good or maybe even better. So you can't automatically discount something just because it's new versus old. I think people tend to let that snake oil get in the way.
Yeah.
The best thing is to let a piece of gear talk to you. Pick up a guitar, play it unplugged. Hit a chord. Does it ring? Does it vibrate? Is it lightweight? It's probably going to be a good guitar. If it's got good electronics in it, plug it in. If it's money, you'll know it. If it feels right, don't worry about when the guitar is made. That's how I ended up with this Strat, you know?
Yep.
I didn't care that this is a modern Fender. All I knew is I plugged it in. I was like, wow, this is such a great guitar, and I just had to have it.
You pick up some guitars and you strum a chord on them and it's just dead, nothing. That's
Not
one
this
you
one.
want. That's one you want to put back on the shelf and move on, try to find something else. I mean, if a guitar doesn't have good acoustics to start with, then it's not going to sound very good. There are a lot of people that would argue that point. There's some companies that would argue that point. They focus more on the electronics, but I think good tone wood, you know, and a good bass is where you need to start first before you start adding electronics. I mean, the wood's got to sound good to begin with.
I think it's important to support these companies, which at this point really are an institution. I mean, you think about the Gibson name, you think about the Fender name. Fender is a musical institution. They're not just a company. Gibson's not just a company. They're a part of music history. I mean, they've made music history by making some of the most iconic instruments they could ever ask for. Now, as a consumer, you're looking to spend your money. Well, then, if the guitar sucks, don't buy it. But if it's great, give it a chance. You know, I think that it's important. So guys, thanks for watching today's video. Maybe this gives you an idea kind of where we stand. Maybe our opinion echoes some of yours. Does your opinion differ from ours? Well, let us know in the description box or the comment section down below. Let us know what you think. Is there something we missed? Is there something that you thought that we're wrong on? Let us know. But we thought we'd make this video. We thought it'd be a fun exercise to talk about just varying things like this and to talk about old versus new in terms of production quality and components. So, you know, I think that pretty much settles it.
I think so, man. I mean, you know, guys, we post every Monday and Friday. If you like what you see, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell so you're getting our videos. And until next time, we'll talk to you soon.
Have a good one.
See ya.